Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the RemitONE interactive panel, Compliance for Money Transfers. I am Oussama Kseibati, Associate Sales Director at RemitONE, and will be hosting today's panel. In the panel, we're going to look at a wide range of key topics within compliance, including AML laws, how to respond to suspicious activity, OFAC compliance, and many others. We have just under an hour for today's discussion. For the first 30 minutes, I'll be moderating a discussion with our expert panelists, and then there'll be 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. Please leave your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any point during the session, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can towards the end. Before we dive in the panel discussion, just a few words about RemitONE, who we are, and how we support businesses in the remittance industry. At RemitONE, we assist a range of businesses, including startups, established money transfer operators, and banks, by providing them with everything they need to start, run, and expand their global money transfer operations. We can get businesses up and running quickly by guiding them through the process of obtaining a license, money service business license, or an MSB bank account. We provide businesses with leading technology, enabling them to run their entire remittance business, enhance customer service, and simplify operations. And finally, we support business growth by connecting our clients to our vast global network that we've delicately nurtured over the years. To start off today's session, I'm pleased to introduce our expert panelists. We have Ibrahim Mohammed, who is an independent payments consultant for companies like Alpha Dhan Exchange and RemitONE. Hi, Ibrahim, how are you today?
Hi, doing good. Thank you.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
And we also have Nadeem Qureshi. He's Chief Technical Officer at USA Money. So without further ado, let's go into today's panel discussions. So I'm going to direct the questions at one of the other of our panelists, but then, of course, it's an open discussion, and I want sort of everyone to feel free to join in at any time if you've got any other sort of points or anything that you feel you want to add. My first question is going to be to Ibrahim. What are the common types of financial crimes that are facing financial institutions today? And what steps should financial institutions be taking to overcome these common crimes?
Thank you, Oussama, for the invite. It's great to be part of this important session related to the money transfer industry. As I see, there are two questions, so I would take it as part by part. The first part, you're talking about the types of financial crimes that are common these days with financial institutions, and the steps that are that need to be taken to overcome or prevent. So the first part, broadly speaking, in terms of the financial crime, there are different types of financial crime. Broadly speaking, there are crimes which are related to money laundering, terrorist financing, related to fraud, related to electronic crime or cyber crime. We have, of course, financial crime related to bribery, corruption. Now, when it comes to our sector, which is the money service business sector, particularly, the three key areas of focus has been the money laundering, terrorist financing, and the electronic crime. Now, specifically speaking, with electronic crime, it has been on the rise. That's mainly because of the pandemic situation, companies moving online. So hence there has been a lot of financial related attacks. In fact, according to some sources, it has been found that over 81% of financial related cyber attacks have been due to ransomware. And this is one key, I would say, concern for most of the financial institutions, wherein they need to, of course, look at their systems and prevent it from any sort of cyber attacks. In terms of steps to be taken for the organizations to overcome, the first is, of course, they need to have the right people, I would say, qualified, experienced people who understand, who have a clear understanding of the risk assessment of the business they are into, the risk assessment of products and services, followed by, of course, processes in place, well-documented processes, of course, guided by policies and procedures. And last but not the least, the systems that needs to be robust enough to prevent, identify, and deter the financial crime.
Okay, fantastic. Could you sort of elaborate slightly on the first part of the question? So, um, what kind of steps can be taken to overcome some of these common crimes?
As I mentioned, the steps that's to be taken is basically into three areas, I would say. So the companies need to, of course, understand first, what are the risks associated with their products and services. They need to definitely ensure that they have the senior management's extensive involvement into understanding the business that the company is into based on the products and services they offer. And apart from that, of course, there should be well-documented processes in place, again, in line with within the jurisdictions that they operate. And of course, the systems that needs to be in place to have the prevention mechanism, and also able to identify and act accordingly whenever there is any sort of incident that takes place. So these are, broadly speaking, the steps that businesses need to take to overcome the financial crimes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. My second question, again, is Nadeem. Nadeem, thank you so much again for your time. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. Your valuable input as the CTO of USI Money. What tools are there in the industry to identify and prevent money laundering, terrorism, financing, and commercial fraud?
So first of all, thank you for having me on, and a big shout out to the IMTC, RemitONE, and yourself, Oussama. So it's, first of all, I think this is a extremely interesting debate, and it's something which is extremely relevant with the digitization and with the way things are progressing, and actually accelerating in quite a extremely rapid and ever-changing way. In terms of tools to combat things which, like Ibrahim has identified, nowadays a lot of the systems, especially with regards to the processing, etc., do come with inbuilt tools. So whether it be things like OFAC lists, PEP lists, sanctions, EU sanctions, for example, based on your geographical location, they do come with some sort of integrated lists. Some of those are done in a live environment. Some of them, entities do on a weekly basis, etc. So, I mean, I think step one is whenever using a third-party system, it's important to understand what comes as part of the basic package or the basic system. The challenge would probably apply more to medium to large enterprises who may choose to create their own software or their own software environment, in which case they would need to rely on third parties. And the good news is that there's every day you hear about new third parties which are coming out with innovative tools to sort of combat and to create sort of a safe and secure environment. And again, it's based on a global locality, so they're all customized. So, i.e., to recap, the first thing is to check what systems and controls are in place within the standard system. There's also a big trend has gone over to things like machine learning, sort of intelligent-based automation, and those tools. Again, it's quite a growing industry, and so much so that I would probably put it onto the same spectrum as fintech, in terms of companies which are coming out with innovative ways of really trying to understand how your business is operating, and then creating the criteria for making sure that it's run in a compliant manner and that no breaches effectively occur. So those are tools which are now quite widely available, and they're becoming more and more common. Again, one of the things that we do encourage is people that have, especially maybe to the smaller enterprises, it's to keep on researching every day that there is something new which is coming out. Even for example, at RemitONE, there's always something which is happening in terms of ongoing progression. And I think it's quite important just to to keep, eyes and ears open and see what are the new tools, what are the new elements which are sort of, coming into play. So a simple thing is to sort of really identify what is the locations or the localities, who are your clients, what type of geographical locations are you sending to, what is the method of payment, and then once that's sort of documented, then you can start identifying the risks or the associated risks. And then the third step would be to implement a process to combat that. Regulation varies in very detailed terms from different localities. Once you have an understanding of that, it's very important just to make sure that those systems, etc., are customized, that so you're within a compliant sort of environment. The big lists are very standard. It works globally, and they are sort of available in such a way that they're actually quite easily available in terms of integrations and getting access. So there's a plethora of systems which are actually available. Everyone's doing sort of free demos, free trials, and it can be a trial and error process. But I think the main important thing is to always look out for the new trends, new regulation, the new updates, the new types of cybercrime or risks, and effectively just try to mitigate as soon as possible against them.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right, Nadeem. And there are sort of two main sort of sides to it. The new regulations that are coming out. It's not just where you yourself operate. It might be where you're sending to. What kind of regulations do they have? What are their maximum? For example, maximum receive amount. They might have a cap on that, depending on what corridor. So understanding that's one thing, but also understanding the area that you're operating from, the ever-changing landscape. Of course, there are always new rules and new regulations coming out, and unless you're on top of those and you've covered those, of course you're putting yourself at risk. Always partnering with someone. Again, I can speak for the RemitONE side. We're constantly doing new, and that's just the nature of it. We are constantly doing new updates, new connecting to new lists, expanding our PEP lists. Doing a lot of the regulations come from some of the central banks. So again, they will have their own lists and connections that you would need to make to them. And I think particularly with as we do expand, you'll see now we have the central bank reporting for the Japan central bank, and again as we expand our business, we'll start to
absolutely. Just to sort of add, I think the sort of availability of plugins, even which RemitONE is offering, is taking us away from an environment of doing a weekly update into a real-time type environment, and I think that's also extremely key, because in the space of days or hours, lists get updated, names get added. So working with something which is real time is, I think, the difference with the weekly and monthly updates, because that's where you could identify maybe a weakness. So in terms of choosing the correct system and then making sure that those elements which exist are in that type of real-time environment. Nowadays you have customers registering and processing within a matter of minutes. It's not like register 1 week and then send the following week. So as we're working towards that more efficient processing, it's extremely important that the system is robust and the controls are robust, and it's sort of set to your needs as opposed to the system needs. I think that's really the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's quite interesting, the kind of trends that we've been noticing is some of the countries that are more opening up now to the remittance. Like for example, I know Singapore is getting a little bit more open, but again, that they're really focusing on the digital side of it. So having the digital KYC and having the digital compliance side, and it's quite interesting to see sort of that change start happening as well. At the same time as, again, more countries opening up, being more receptive, they can see that there's lots of remittances in and out, sort of Southeast Asia or Middle East even. We've got Middle Eastern clients, they're starting to think about having mobile apps and things like that, and how do we get around compliance. around that. Just was quite interesting.
I think that's an interesting point that you touched on. So although there is definitely a rise in sort of digital KYC and KYB, I think sometimes we forget that onboarding process is different from the ongoing monitoring process. So just because an onboarding is done, whether it's digitally or using third-party plugins, etc., and a customer is validated or verified and allowed to trade, that doesn't take away the onus or the responsibility on making then sure that the transactions are then processed in the correct way, which is why transaction monitoring is just as important as actually the onboarding process. I think a lot of the times we use onboarding and the a lot of checks to justify that a customer may be legitimate, but then the weaknesses can sometimes, or in the majority, is actually during the transaction process where
there need to be ongoing checks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. For it to be effective every
yeah.
time someone makes a payment, there's the remitter and the beneficiary.
Absolutely.
Because again, I could be above board today. Tomorrow I might do something untoward, end up on the list. And unless you're checking at the payment stage, I mean, there's a big gap there, and then there's we're failing in what we're supposed to do.
Yeah,
absolutely. Just going to move on to our third question for Ibrahim. Ibrahim, drawing from your experience, what are the best practices for exercising due diligence in transaction monitoring? So let's kind of slip into that nicely. What are the best practices when exercising due diligence in transaction monitoring / KYC?
Okay, so I think we touched part of it earlier in the previous question, but yeah, I mean, these two elements are very important, transaction monitoring and KYC. So we start with KYC, obviously, where we onboard customers. We have to identify who the customers are, what are the channels of interaction. So companies are moving now to digital. And when you move digital, then you need to change the entire way of capturing their KYC information digitally. And here is where, of course, there are multiple systems, including RemitONE, that can facilitate the onboarding, with comfort, with ensuring that the customers are who they claim they are, to verify them, to authenticate them, and then, of course, to allow them to do the transactions. So there's lots of, I would say, technologies around KYC. So when we go into digital space, today the eKYC is becoming, the hot topic, especially with the acceleration of digitalization due to pandemic. Most of the companies who used to even traditionally do, agent-based or brick and mortar-based transactions are now moving digital. So they have spent a lot on those technologies. So some countries have even taken one step ahead where they do kind of unified KYC by means of having, one digital identity, such as countries in the UAE where there is UAE Pass. There's a lot of initiatives around Emirates ID, wherein once you register with such profile, then you don't have to re-KYC yourself to avail other services. So that's a trend we see, which will, of course, grow over a period of time. That's again to simplify the lives when it comes to KYC and onboarding. Now, talking about transaction monitoring, very important, it should be on an ongoing basis, as Nadeem rightly mentioned. So when we onboard the customers, does not mean that that's it. We have verified the customer, they're all good to go. It is the ongoing behavior of the customer in terms of their transactions. So again, this is where, the profiling plays an important role. You need to do a proper risk profiling or categorization based on the transactions behavior of the customers. And then you categorize those customers into different risk profiles. So one is at the customer level, the other is on the transaction level. And again, on the transaction level, there are various parameters today which can be configured in the systems, such as, where the money is going to, the destination country. So for example, if the destination country is a high risk, this is where you need to put additional checks in place, probably additional capturing of data elements. When it comes to, for example, the amount of transfer, you set up the limits based on, again, the destination countries, based on the mode of payouts, whether it's a cash pickups or bank transfers. So there are various parameters that goes into the transaction monitoring, and this should be, again, monitored on an ongoing basis with the help of systems. And of course, the respective alerts need to be acted upon by, the people handling the systems. So these are some of the best practices I see in terms of transaction monitoring and KYC.
That's awesome, actually. So what you're saying is, I can set risk thresholds depending on the kind of information people are providing me when on the onboarding. So, for example, if some of the information that I've requested might be his nationality, and I might think that's from a high risk sort of area, so I might allocate a risk score of 3 to him. And at the end of that form, he will have a cumulative risk score. And depending on what risk score that is, I can then set compliance rules against that score. So if he has a total risk threshold of 6, he might be able to do $1,000 as an example. But if that risk threshold is 9, he might only be able to do $100 as an example. So that's how you monitor and sort of control these things. And there's also one on the payment side itself. So depending on the type of payments I'm doing, it might add a risk threshold or deduct a risk threshold. So maybe every time I fail a payment, it's going to add a risk score of 1, or every time I do a successful normal payment, it might deduct a risk score. And again, if I've sort of reached a certain threshold, again, you can then start applying some controls on those. So that's quite interesting. Excellent. And the other part of it you mentioned again was the ongoing sort of checks we can do, not only on the OFAC DFAC side, but sort of the type of payments that they're making. Is that correct? How do we get around things like maybe I want to send a certain amount of money to a particular beneficiary, but there is a limit. So I might again set up an account with you, send some money, and ask my cousin to set up an account with you, and then send some more money. Is there anything that we can do to get around that?
Yeah. So yes, exactly. So there are a lot of parameters available that can be configured in the money transfer systems today, where you can configure based on one-to-many or many-to-one relationship. So one remitter sending to a particular beneficiary, or let's say many remitters sending to a common beneficiary. The system can identify easily with the profile.
So you're talking about linked beneficiaries here.
Exactly, linked
Fantastic.
transactions. Right. And so there are two things. One is the initial configuration that you do, and then you update based on the kind of behavior of the transactions happening in the system, because over a period of time, the system also learns and then generates the alerts. Some systems, they also go through the complete machine learning process, where then propose to you what kind of rules, what kind of parameters you need to have, in order to keep in par with such kind of behaviors. Here is where, of course, the enhanced due diligence applies. So depending on, of course, the customer's behavior, if you feel that there is additional information needed to be captured as part of the transaction, then this is where the system pops up, the relevant fields to be captured, such as source of funds, or probably some additional documentation to ensure that this transaction is for its genuine intent.
Awesome. So we can also have triggers. Let's just say if you reach a certain value, you are going to have to provide me with more information, basically.
Absolutely. So it can be based on destination, based on the type of risk profile assigned to the customer, based on the type of the entire payment set. So, for example, for cash pickup transactions, you might have a separate, control over as compared to bank transfer payments.
Yeah, I wouldn't want anyone to walk into your agent with a briefcase full of money saying, can you please transfer this? Source of funds might be an issue. Yeah, and wire transfer might be preferable. I can absolutely see that. Yeah.
True. Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, with today's technologies, definitely life becomes much more easier, I would say, for the compliance team, actually, as far as, of course, they keep their systems up to date, they keep their processes up to date, and they also comply with the regulations within the jurisdictions in which they operate. Now, one of the challenges I see generally from compliance team is because the nature of our business is cross-border payments. It is not just the jurisdiction in which they operate, but also the cross-border jurisdictions. And depending on the level of compliance in each jurisdiction, they'll have to tweak their systems. So this is something that, of course, needs to be always done on an ongoing basis.
I'm going to move on to my next question, and I'm going to go back to Nadeem for this one. We start the clock. Nadeem, how do you create an effective transaction monitoring program?
Okay, so
this is happening for you at the moment. Your website is running. You've got a massive network and all sorts of headaches happening. What have you put in place?
It does become sometimes a bit of a web, and maybe just to make things easier. I think because we'd probably have various members of the audience at various stages of their business. It could be a small business, medium size. It might be a large business, but I think in either category, the first thing is to really look at what it is that you're doing or you're trying to do or you're planning to do. Are you for example, a B2B service? Is it a B2C service? Is it a B2B2C service, i.e. do you have agents? And then once you sort of identify your customers, you break it down, like Ibrahim said, you've mentioned about the dual jurisdiction process. What are the rules and regs locally in my send country? What are the rules and regs in the receive country? And then when a system is configured or set up or re-looked at, because sometimes we sort of rush to go live and we don't really spend time or an emphasis, especially from a tech perspective, they just want to move and go live. But it's really important to sort of understand, first of all, where you are, what you're going to do, and make sure those certain configurations and parameters are set. And those should be set based on that regulation. And that's extremely important. Only then can you create something in terms of a framework, whether it's monitoring, whether it's compliance, and make sure that that you are operating. Now, one of the failures, and there's been a lot of cases here within Europe, wasn't the fact that the systems were not robust. It wasn't even the fact that there wasn't a process. There was a due process in place. The issue we have is actually non-conformance, i.e. we create procedures, we create these AML manuals, we create all the the maximum payouts, etc., and linked beneficiaries. All of that infrastructure exists, but it's actually the effectiveness disappears when it comes to when you start to let things go, for example, or the types of reporting, whether it was an automated check or a random check that you had decided to do at point of go live, is not followed, and that's a common practice. And another thing is training. Training comes with updates within jurisdictions, updates on tech, updates in just generalized news, updates in lists. It's like we sort of fall behind on the conformance part, and then you sort of lose visibility on, okay, this is what I had. You sort of miss out on the first two things. You're not able to identify your customers. You're not able to understand what's happening with local regulation because you're more worried about sales, etc. So from a small enterprise perspective, I think that's one of the keys. We must dedicate and make sure that whatever we decided to do in terms of the controls, that they are actually followed. And I think that's one of the key points. A lot of issues have come about recently with regards to agencies. So if you have partners, network partners, or third-party agents who are dealing with end customers, whether it be through an automated system or not, you have to keep in mind there could be other sort of breaches. Are you training those agents effectively? Are you auditing them on an biannual basis? So effectively, everybody who's viewing or operating within their business, you are the best people. You are the best people to understand your business. It's very hard for somebody else to understand something the way you would understand it. So you would be the first point to know or to try to investigate where are there breaches, what are the areas. Okay, maybe I'm doing monitoring very well, but I'm not doing training very well. Maybe I'm doing training very well, but my customers' habits are changing, or the third-party system. So effectively, effective control means, first of all, conforming to whatever it is that you create. Creating is very easy, creating whether it's the manuals or these things, but just to make sure that you actually follow through. And I think that's a key point.
Yeah, absolutely. And essentially, when we are going to like the likes of the FCA and HMRC and applying for licenses, we are saying to them, these are the controls we are going to have in place, and they're signing off and saying, okay, great, as long as you stick to these, you're fine. And if we do start to sort of slack on that, we don't. Well, errors are going to start to happen. Payments are going to start to slip through. We haven't stuck to our procedures, and yeah, absolutely. I think that's where we're going to get into a lot of trouble. That way.
I'm sorry, just to add, doing a risk-based assessment. So a lot of MTOs, MSPs, FIs, they used to, or the majority do concentrate on single corridors, or maybe 2 or 3 corridors. We have obviously the medium to large, which then have vast networks. But risk-based assessments is key. And making sure that you understand localities, payment method types, and allocating a number, a digit next to that, it actually creates a lot of clarity in terms of justification, and also when you move forward, when you get a different type of customer, to then risk assess them to make sure that that certain boundaries are never breached. So we always would defend the corridors that we're sending to, because it's something that we specialize in and everything's okay. But what are the sanctions? What are the ratings with regards to that locality, and then creating that risk-based approach, even if it's done in a manual way, because then your configurations on your systems are set up based on those ratings.
Absolutely agree. I'll move on. Okay, this one's for Ibrahim. What types of penalties exist for non-compliance and enforcement actions? And what advice would you give to businesses when they're responding to law enforcement requests?
Yeah, quite a sensitive, I would say, question for the financial sector. So when we talk about penalties, Oussama, broadly speaking, we can divide it into 2 parts. We can say the financial penalties and the non-financial penalties. And when we talk about financial penalties, we have seen, till lately, how many, penalties have been imposed on various institutions, including some of the large players, in the financial sector, including money transfer companies. So that could range from, small fines based on the type of incidents, all the way to, substantial amounts, which even sometimes, forces the company to downsize or even close their operations. So that's on the financial side. The non-financial side has got even much more, I would say, serious consequences to the business, because that could also lead to disqualification of the individuals who are responsible within the business. That could also lead to suspension or even termination of licenses. And we have seen also that happening. So what my advice would be to businesses is to take, they say prevention is better than cure. So to have really those preventive measures in place. And also, if at all they encounter any sort of incidents, they need to be proactive. That's what the regulations normally, prefer from the, participants to report to them on time. And if at all they have any gaps, they should be very clear about it. They should be very detailed and present the whole incident in an accurate manner, without hiding or without manipulations. So that's a piece of advice I would give to the businesses, particularly when reporting to the law enforcement requests.
Excellent, fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean,
and just to add, sorry, the preventive measures are very important. So if at all there is a lapse identified or an incident has happened, the most important thing that the regulator looks at is not just how you have reacted to this or how you have closed, but also the measures that you have taken to prevent, from similar incidents happening in the future.
so we know, yes, some of these fines, I think the HSBC last time they got fined for non-compliance, I mean, it goes into the hundreds of millions, probably why they like to do the de-risking on their end, because yeah, I mean, it's not a small slap on the wrist, particularly to do with the monetary side. I mean, is there a risk of actual incarceration? No, Ibrahim, is that another thing that could happen if I again don't comply, and could there be jail time for me, or is it just a fine?
Oh no, there is definitely. So as I said, that comes under the non-financial penalties, which has got much more serious consequences, yes, to the entities and those individuals who are responsible. And we have lately seen, I mean, there has been some, let's say, Bureau de Change operators in London who had been recently found to be completely violating, the guidelines given by FCA particularly and HMRC. And then they had to, of course, shut down. And not only that, the director was also, penalized and also taken to courts and was sentenced,
Wow.
for, so it's quite serious, And in general, as we all know, the money service business particularly is of high risk. So definitely, there has to be an extra, I would say, care given on such incidents.
Ibrahim, can you specify, and this is the question from the audience before I go into the last, another one to Nadeem, can you specify training available to mitigate these risks in our region? So what kind of training can a compliance officer do? Are there any specific online courses, anything like that that either me, myself, my AML officer should be doing?
Yeah. Nadeem, would I take this, or would you like to take it?
No, I can take it. That's nowadays a lot of the third-party providers which have plugins, etc., they actually come with a whole module around training. So if you have new recruits, new people coming, or updated regulation, there's these updated refresher courses which are there. Places like the UK, like the HMRC, for example, which sort of regulates and registers MSPs, they actually offer monthly seminars and talks, etc., which is really good to go, where they give updates. They actually inform us on the latest trends that they're seeing from a generalized fraud perspective. A lot of third-party compliance companies also do create nowadays certification-based courses. So you can have everything from specific sections right the way through to technical and cybersecurity type based questions. So sometimes you have to keep in mind that it's not necessarily just your compliance officer. It's actually your salesperson. It would be your accounts guy. It could be your mid office, the processing of payments, settlements, etc. So there's various, I would say, elements or generally as a team that everyone has to have a certain amount of knowledge, number one. Naturally, your compliance officer would have to be 10 times more alert and on the ball. And the main thing is nowadays, even if you think about compliance officers, they're almost independent of the organization. They're not in a position to be influenced by sales and numbers, etc. It's literally deciding with the board or the structure of the company, deciding the do's and don'ts. I will get trained every week. I will do a course every month. I will do this, a random check, and then just literally following through. And a lot of the fines, they're actually handed out to small enterprises, not medium or large. Medium and large are just fines. The small enterprises are made examples of, and like you said, incarcerations, disqualifications, etc. It's pretty harsh, because I think what the regulators or prosecutors do try and do is to inform or to let everyone know, guys, this is what you're getting into. It's pretty serious. You've been granted the licenses, but this is what happens if there's non-conformance. Training is a big part of that. Training is absolute. It's not just about creating the controls and making sure the alerts come. It's what happens, like Ibrahim said earlier on. What happens once that alert is generated? Are you then taking the steps to document the rest of that, whether it's suspension of a client, requesting additional docs or information, or if it's an agent, if it's an audit, just to make sure that you are in that audit ready mode. Questions that you would ask are questions, if you don't ask, they will be asked to you, and then you need to have a decision.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think you're absolutely right. I've worked in sort of several different positions in organizations, all the way right from sort of trading on the desk, and you're absolutely right. If everyone needs to have some sort of sense of compliance, part of getting a payment in is not tipping them off, is not tipping the person off. That's part of the compliance. Now, as a sales guy, if you're just on the desk, how do you know not to tell the guy, sorry, this didn't go through? I can see on my screen that you're on the OFAC list, mate. Yeah. There has to be sort of a level. Everyone has to. You're absolutely right. And there has to be continuous, ongoing training in case there's anything changed in the industry, or again, there's new rules and regulations, or just to refresh your memory. We get complacent, I think, as human beings in general, anyway. And I think you're absolutely right.
I just remembered one thing that recently came up was just simple data. It might not even be something which is sinister. It might just simply be, passing on information which was sensitive, actually, or not to the registered user. I mean, even the fines and penalties, like Ibrahim mentioned, with regards to breaches in terms of regulatory breaches. If you think about the new GDPR rules, if somebody has done a right to be forgotten and then sent an email the following week, so there's a lot of sensitive elements that I think need to generalize, that they need to be taken care of in general terms.
We just have
on the training bit, if I may add also, on the training bit, apart from the the resources available from the regulatory bodies, definitely when it comes to compliance, it's good to have training from associations like International Compliance Association, which is quite a recognized body here in UK. There's another one which is US based, known as ACAMS. So they have different kinds of courses depending on the type of audience, I would say, or the type of participants, or the participants' interest rather. And here, what I would like to really advise, based on my own experience working with different clients, is compliance is not just for the MLRO; it is for the entire organization. So even if the director of the company says, okay, I just want to kind of offload everything on compliance, about compliance to MLR, it doesn't work this way. They have to understand that they are equally responsible. So they have to work hand in hand, with their MLROs or with the compliance team, and understand the importance of compliance and AML, across on the business.
I agree. I'm gonna just fire off this last question to Nadeem, but try to make it quick, and I'll wrap it up. Nadeem, what can we expect to see in terms of RegTech solutions in the next 12 to 24 months? Any new stuff? This is for both of you. Any cool stuff you're seeing in industry? Any sort of facial recognition that can tell me my name just by looking at my face or anything?
It's a good one. So RegTech over the last 20 to 36 months is something which is really expanding, and it goes back to elements that we've mentioned earlier on. So in terms of the machine learning elements, so earlier on we described local reg and send countries, reporting tools, etc., which were there, and they were sort of their standard. But if you look at some of the things which are happening with regards to machine learning, so it's a very customized and a personal type compliance framework, and it's literally doing what we mentioned earlier. It understands your business, it starts to understand your client, and then it creates those recommendations because it's running off thousands, if not millions, of algorithms to improve, that user behavior. And again, it's something which has existed in tech before, but with RegTech now, what we're starting to see is the failure. If you look at the last 5 years before banks started to de-risk, one of the failures was effectively regulation, and those FIs being concerned about the way in which a small team of 3 or a team of 10 were effectively operating and monitoring, things that we've covered earlier on. And that's why banks started to exit, because they saw this as an extremely high risk sector. But with RegTech, when you have now industry recognized systems, and the functions which are available, actually has the capacity or the ability to change banking institutions' risk appetites, because they know that it's a lot more robust, and there's millions, if not billions, behind these companies, which are, even at the moment, there's been some record funding for RegTech. And RegTech is also, over the next 12 to 24 months, it's going to be based a lot on GRC, so governance, risk, and compliance.
Sorry, Nadeem, I'm going to have to cut you short there. We're coming up to the end, but thank you so much again for your time and your input. It's been great speaking to you. Thank you, Ibrahim. for your time. It's always a pleasure speaking to you guys. And always interesting. I mean, I could carry on sort of just picking your guys' brain back again. So guys, everyone else, thank you very much for attending today's RemitONE panel on compliance. We hope you found the session useful. We'd like to extend a big thank you, obviously, to our panelists. Ibrahim, thank you so much for providing such valuable insight. We'd also like to thank IMTC EMEA 21 for offering to host the panels, offering to host today's panel. We'll be providing a written summary and a video upload of today's session in our next newsletter, so please keep an eye out for that. Thanks again, everyone. Please get in touch if there's anything you'd like to discuss regarding the session or RemitONE, and please enjoy the rest of IMTC. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers. This session was sponsored by RemitONE. To know more about our sponsor, let's see this short clip.
Money transfer is an exciting and dynamic business to be in, but it's not all plain sailing. Increased pressure from regulators and banks can make it hard to get a money transfer business underway, or to keep one running smoothly. Legacy systems can mean an existing money transfer business gets stuck in the mud. Entering the digital age can seem like, well, an age away. That's where RemitONE comes in. We're experts in money transfer technology, and our partners can help you through the maze of regulations and options to get you going. To top it all, our ready-made connections across the money transfer market will help you grow quickly. Using our software, you'll be able to make secure transactions 24 hours a day, you'll stay on the right side of compliance, you can expand the range of services you offer to your customers, and you can extend the ways in which you reach them. Tap into our one-stop shop of key supply chain members like payment and SMS gateways, ID verification services, acquiring bank solutions, and payout partners. Imagine a world where you can do all this. Come and talk to the experts. RemitONE, empowering remittance.
Once again, we thank our speakers and all of you for your presence. We hope you have enjoyed this session. We'd also like to thank you, our sponsor, RemitONE, who is giving away a $50 Visa card to one of the attendees of this session. Check out our winner on our social media platforms. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Pinned platform. See you in the next session.